Also, controversial take, Zootopia 2 is more politically complex than Wicked 2. Today, I am going to be doing a mega wrap up of the 2025 year. I'm going to be looking back on the books that I read, the movies I watched, and the tears that I have shed. First, we're going to start with books. I finally updated my Goodreads after literally abandoning it for a whole year. And I literally only went back and updated everything just so that I can get my Goodreads year in review for books and be able to share with you. I'm also going to share the reading spreadsheet that I have with more specific data about the genres of books I read and how much money I saved because I exclusively read from libraries and other reading stats. Then when I get to the movie portion, we can take a look at my Letterboxd Wrapped, and I'll also talk about my favorite movies of the year and some of the early screenings that I was able to see. Last thing we'll talk about is my crying Wrapped because I decided to keep track of how often I cry throughout the year. I decided to put together all of that data into a presentation. So whether you're a book reader or a movie watcher or a crier like I am, or maybe you just like the idea of me feeling constant sorrow throughout the year, hopefully there will be at least one thing that will entertain you for this video. I know most people do like these wrap-up videos for the books to inspire people to read. And so if your New Year's resolution is to read more books, then I would actually suggest checking out Book of the Month, which is the sponsor of today's video. Book of the Month is an online book subscription service that curates at least 5 of the latest buzziest books for you to choose from to be delivered to your door. And so with the new year, I have picked out 2 books. One of them is Rings of Fate, which is a fairy tale romantasy. It's got beautiful sprayed edges and artwork on the end pages. I picked this up because this is a common genre that I typically read. And then I also chose My Husband's Wife, which is a thriller, and that is a genre that I haven't gotten to read lately, but I do want to get into it more. So I decided to kind of like have a good balance for this month, but they definitely have other genres too. So you won't be in short supply of decisions. If a month selection doesn't catch your eye though, you can skip any month, anytime, and you will not be charged. Each book is covered by their reader's guarantee. So that means if you purchase a book and you don't like it, they will replace it for free in your next box. And your reading is always rewarded through their loyalty program, and the savings start after just 3 boxes. So if you want to start the new year off with exciting new books, you can join and get your first book for $5 plus a free gift with the code GOALS. So thank you to Book of the Month for sponsoring, and now let's dive into my reading stats. Starting with my Goodreads Wrapped. For the year 2025, I have read 89 books. This is the highest number of books I've ever read in a year, but I will have to caveat that 10 of them, actually no, 11 of them were manga. In 2024, I had read 79 books. So I think if you were to take away the manga, it would pretty much be the same number. Goodreads says that I have allegedly read 27,650 pages, but I say allegedly because if you want the actual numbers, that's what the reading spreadsheet is for. So just ignore that stat for now. The shortest book that I read was Bird Boy. This is something I also read with Victoria because she loves graphic novels, but we both felt like the shortness of the book is actually to the detriment of the story because we barely got anything. We got some lore, but we didn't see the lore actually apply to the events of the story much. The longest book that I read was Gifted and Talented, which was 633 pages. This is a surprise to me because this did not feel like the longest book I had read. That might be because even though this book is categorized under fantasy, it was very light when it came to the speculative elements, to the point where I actually kind of felt like it was unnecessary. The story was really about family drama. The average book length that I read was 310 pages. The most shelved book that I read was Sunrise on the Reaping. I am one of those people who do think that the extra books that Suzanne Collins has been putting out for the Hunger Games have been unnecessary in the franchise. I know that mega fans of the Hunger Games will disagree with me because you do get extra details, but for me, those details weren't enough to justify a whole book. That being said, I will still be seated in the movie theaters to check it out because I love being part of the cultural zeitgeist. The least shelved book is actually a book that has not come out yet. This is a graphic novel written and drawn by a friend that I had made this year. She had finished coloring the pages for her book and she offered to send me the PDF to check it out early. I was having a bad mental health day that day and I read her book while we were hanging out at a cafe, and it was just so cute and wholesome and cozy that it really did lift my spirits. Part of it was seeing a friend's book turning real. That was exciting, but then another part of it is just like the story itself. Basically, it takes place in a world where where everyone has a beam of light that leads them directly to their soulmate. And the main girl is part of a church that really emphasizes this concept of soulmates and how you need to like save yourself until you find your soulmate. Don't date anyone else. The main girl actually ends up falling in love with another girl, but their lights are not pointing to each other. The highest rated book I read on Goodreads is The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. I too did think that was a great book, just because so much of the stories that this child psychiatrist was sharing about the children that he had treated were so harrowing and heartbreaking, but at the same time, he gave so much compassion and insight. The first book that I read in the year was The Dagger and the Flame. If you're someone who reads a lot of young adult fantasy, I think that it can be very easy to predict the tropes and events that will happen in this book, but I had read this as my first book of the year because 2025 started off on a very sad note. I had a loved one pass away, and so I spent the beginning of the year traveling back and forth and helping out with the logistics of, taking care of stuff after someone passes away. I think when life gets very tumultuous, you kind of need that predictability in order to just like get through it, because you're already dealing with so much change at once. And so that was the kind of book for me where I just wanted to read a book that wasn't super complex, but it had like enough escapism. And then I'm going to scroll through all of the books that I had read throughout the year. As you can see, a lot of them was nonfiction, some speculative novels, A Sign of Affection, because I read like 10 manga volumes of that. Then it says my last review of the year was Mate by Ali Hazelwood, but technically the last book that I had read in 2025 was The Curse of the Coal Women. This is a historical novel that follows 3 generations of women who have a curse, where basically every generation will give birth to a daughter, and then the mother will take her own life by throwing her body over the sea. So this was the last book that I read during my flight to California, where I would celebrate New Year's with my friends. So I found it very fitting that I'm celebrating the passage of time with this kind of timeless book here. Now let's get into the granular, specific statistics that I have collected in my mega reading spreadsheet. This is a template that I use every year, created by Hardback Hoarder, which I will link in my description. The only information I didn't include among the 89 books were for the 11 manga books that I had read, because I didn't want that to skew the statistics. So with that in mind, let's get into the yearly stats. In total, I had read 12,265 pages of books. For audiobooks, I listened to 374.9 hours. Again, I read 89 books, but 11 of them were rereads, and that was basically the manga series that I had read. Based on these stats, the average days it would take for me to finish a book would be 9 days. And I never have a reading goal because I don't want to pressure myself to read like a certain quantity of books. But because the template that Hardback Hoarder made asks you to input a goal, I just put 69, and I have well exceeded this goal at 129%. Next, we also have a monthly breakdown of the books that I have read. March was the highest number of books, totaling at 15, but that was also because 10 of those books were the manga. Otherwise, if we're only talking about traditional books, then that would be in the month of November with 10 books. I remember that month I was kind of in a reading slump when it came to reading books physically or as an ebook. So instead, I would listen to a whole bunch of them as an audiobook. And then the month where I had the lowest number of books was June and September, which was both 4 books each month. When it comes to format, I read 40 audiobooks, 35 ebooks, and 3 physical books. Before, I have typically read more ebooks than audiobooks, but again, I think because I was going through somewhat of a reading slump and it was a lot easier for me to digest stories through audiobooks, that's probably why there's a higher number of audiobooks for this year. Otherwise, the rest of the numbers are not a surprise. Like 3 physical books is pretty normal for me because I find that carrying around a physical book just takes up too much space in my belongings, and I would much rather read a story on my phone instead of lugging a book back and forth. I did buy some books this year when I wanted to support authors, but even then, it's literally just to give them money. But for the actual reading of the book, I would borrow it as an ebook from my library app because it's just easier for me to read that way. In terms of the audience, I read 64 adult books, 3 middle grade books, and 11 young adult books. Again, this is pretty consistent. I think out of the 3 middle grade books, 2 of them were graphic novels, and then the other one was The Wild Robot, which I only picked up because Victoria wanted to buddy read it, and we had both loved that movie. Otherwise, I mostly read adult books, but I do have a fondness for young adult books. I just am very picky with them. I think that's why I ended up writing a young adult book myself, because I have such like particular taste when it comes to like the kind of story I would want to read, and so it's just easier for me to write the damn book myself. But the best young adult book book that I had read in 2025 was And the River Drags Her Down, which I talked about in my best books of the year. I think this book is such a great example of why you shouldn't listen to the stigma of young adult books being too immature or juvenile, or that the writing isn't as good, because I thought the writing for this book was fantastic. It has such lovely poetic prose, and the themes about sisterhood and grief were done really well. And then when it comes to series stats, 4 of the books I read were companion novels, 11 of them were part of a series, and 63 were standalone books. I definitely prefer standalone books. It just takes a lot for me to consider to continue a series. Next, we have a chart breaking down my star ratings. So since last year, I had stopped making my star ratings public in order to prevent authors and chronically online readers from having an aneurysm. The majority of the books I have rated have been 3 stars, with a total number of 28. If we want to go on extreme levels, 5 of the books I've read, I rated 5 stars, and 2 of the books I've read, I rated 1 star. And if you have watched my best books and worst books videos, you could probably make some guesses about which books they were. When it comes to genres, the biggest percentage that I read was fantasy at 25.6%, with 20 fantasy books. And then the second biggest genre was nonfiction books at 20.5% at 16 books. And then the third largest genre I read was romance at 17.9% at 14 books. When it comes to the subgenres, it looks like romance barely beats it out as the number 1 subgenre at 24.4% with 19 books. And then a close second place would be contemporary at 18 books at 23.1%. And then the third biggest one would be memoirs at 7 books at 9%. All right, now let's get into the money that I have saved. Basically, I took all 89 books and looked up what their prices were on Amazon and put it all down to calculate how much money I saved by not buying them from Amazon. That amount saved is $1,414.52. And now let's go over to the books that I had dropped reading. In total, I did not finish 48 books. So that's almost half of the books that I've read in total. And I'm totally okay with that because I have gotten into the habit of just dropping books when I'm not in the mood for it anymore. And it has nothing to do with like whether the book is bad or not. Sometimes I'm just not in the mood for it. Sometimes my library hold is running out of time and I would rather prioritize another book instead. The month that I had the biggest number of books that I dropped was the month of June, where I had dropped 7 books. And that also happened to be the month where I had finished the lowest number of books at 4. So basically, I dropped way more books than I had finished them. And you know what? I'm totally okay with that. The farthest I got along in a book was 79%. And then the earliest that I dropped a book was at 2%. So this is what I mean, where I'm very liberal when it comes to dropping books. So that wraps up the books that I have read throughout the year. I hope this reminds people that it's okay if you don't read many books, or if you are reading a book but you're not feeling it, it's also okay to drop it. Because at the end of the day, it should just be for fun. You don't need to make it a race or a competition if that's just gonna add unnecessary pressure. Just do you. Okay, now let's get into the movies I watched this year. I'm gonna pull up my Letterboxd Wrapped and go over them. In 2025, I watched 68 movies, culminating into 116 hours watched. They don't list it here, but I dug into the movies myself and counted how many of them were rewatches, and it turns out that is 11, which is funny enough, the same number for how many books I reread in the year. That means I had watched 57 movies that were new to me for the first time. The most watched actor for me was Christopher Knight, and at first I was like, who the hell is this person? And I looked him up, and basically he was in the Shrek movies and the Bad Guys too. I literally have no idea what role he played in these movies, and the only reason why he even appears here is because my girlfriend loves Shrek, and so I had rewatched the Shrek movies with her. As you can tell, she especially loves Shrek 2, so that means I rewatched Shrek 2 not just once, but twice. My most watched director is Andrew Adamson, which, surprise, surprise, was the director of the Shrek movies. The highly rated 2025 films that I have watched were Sinners, K-pop Demon Hunters, and Zootopia 2. And you know what? All 3 of them fucking deserve it. Controversial take. Equally. But I do want to give a shout out to Flow, which did win the Oscars, and I definitely think it deserves it because it was made by a small Lithuanian studio. They had animated the film using a free program, and so I definitely think movies like Flow and K-pop Demon Hunters, like those are the animated movies that need to be winning awards so that Disney can stop producing the slop that they do every damn year. The only exception that I will give is Zootopia 2, only because the love that Nick Wilde and Judy Hopps have for each other is so pure that they transcend Disney slop. Let me go over real quick why I love each of these movies. K-pop Demon Hunters, I think will take number one for me. I just love how original it is. The animation is so damn good. The romance, I was eating that shit up. I loved it so much that I dressed up as a Saja girl for Halloween. I love movies that make me think, how the hell are the characters gonna get out of this situation? And that's exactly how I felt watching K-pop Demon Hunters, because the evil boy band, they were so damn good. Soda Pop was a fucking bop, and then when they played Your Idol, I transcended with them. I was like, how the hell are these bitches gonna save the world when this boy band is actually pretty damn good? And yet they did save the world with the power of radical optimism. My top two of the movie of the year is Flow, and I'm just gonna insert a TikTok.
Whatever you do, don't watch Flow. Just kidding, watch Flow. It's pretty good. Oh my god. It's a pretty good movie. It's a beautiful movie.
I know objectively Sinners deserves to be in the top 3, but listen, the way that Zootopia 2 had a chokehold on me, my TikTok algorithm has been curated to show me edits of Nick and Judy. Nick is just giving sex eyes to Judy the entire time while she's trying to save the world and stop ethnic cleansing. Also, controversial take, Zootopia 2 is more politically complex than Wicked 2. I posted that on TikTok and the Wicked fans got real mad at me, but listen, I must speak my truth, okay? And then for Sinners, I will say one thing to at least try to salvage the bridges that I have burned, putting all these animated movies at the top. I will say that even though I'm rooting for K-pop Demon Hunters to win every possible Oscar that they can get, the only movie that I will accept beating K-pop Demon Hunters in terms of like original movie soundtrack or whatever that category is called in the Oscars is Sinners, because that singer's voice is damn good, and that whole montage in Sinners, and you see the generations of musicians and dancers and all these different eras. I watched that shit high in theaters and it truly elevated everything for me. And you know what, if anything, it just goes to show how great Sinners is for someone like me who typically ranks animated movies at the top, to go ahead and look at a gritty live action movie that I typically wouldn't watch and be like, you know what, that shit deserves to be in the high ranks along with fucking Nick Wilde. Anyway, the most watched week of 2025 for me was week 6, February 3rd to 9, where I watched 5 films. Most watched day for me is Saturday with 18 films. The first movie I watched was Maxine on January 1st with my college friends on New Year's. That movie was unfortunately ass. I did like Pearl, but the other 2 movies in the franchise, I'm not a fan of. The protagonist doesn't do anything to fend off the killer. She doesn't outsmart them, and you don't see her challenged. She has other people looking out for her, but if you're just watching the main character get help the entire time in the movie, it's like, what's the point? And yes, the last movie I watched of the year was Zootopia 2 on December 6th in theaters. As for my diary milestones, the 50th movie I had watched was I Know What You Did Last Summer. I watched this with Elias and it was so boring. He has suggested this movie, but the thing is, his movie tastes are so ass. Sometimes when I am interested in seeing a movie and I see that he's watched it and he says that he really likes it, to me that's an indicator that it's gonna suck. We have very different movie tastes, so I should have known that this movie would have been a flop for me. Lastly, the most watched theme for me was kids in animation. Who's surprised? Who's surprised with my grown ass wearing this Sanrio sweatshirt right here? And then the most watched nano genre is cartoon, gag, and adventure. Gagged indeed. I was gagged by a lot of these animated movies. And then outside of Letterboxd, I also wanted to talk about the early screenings that I got to attend this past year. So something that I got really into was signing up for advanced screenings for movies that haven't been released yet. And basically, I only found out about this because I started getting Instagram ads for it. So when you go to these advanced screenings, a lot of times you will have to fill in a survey and you also have to sign an NDA where you agree to not talk about the movie or even share the title until after it's released. So I can reveal to you the movies that have already been released, but But in total, the early screenings I've watched for this year are 10 movies. A few of them have already been released, and my favorite one was Good Fortune. This was a comedy movie about Keanu Reeves playing a guardian angel who tries to help out this broke guy by showing him that money isn't everything. So he makes the broke guy switch lives with a rich guy. But then the broke guy is like, oh my God, my life is so awesome. I never want to switch back. And then the rich guy is like, oh my God, now my life fucking sucks. I think the edible just really hit me emotionally when I watched this movie because I cried my eyes out when I watched this. It's not even like a deep movie or Oscars worthy or anything like that. I just deeply empathize for the characters and the struggles that they were dealing with. But also, I think that Keanu Reeves did such a good job playing a guardian angel who had like this childlike naivete about him. He was just so endearing as he was like navigating real world issues. And I do think some of the hopeful messaging and moments that were in the movie felt very tacked on. But hopefully the final product of the movie has improved upon that. Another movie I got to see that I really enjoyed was Begonia. I saw this the day before it officially released. I found this to be so enthralling and entertaining, but in a very stressful way. It's basically about a loser incel conspiracy theorist who believes this billionaire CEO girl boss is actually an alien. And so he kidnaps her and tortures her to try to get her to admit that she is an alien. And so she tries to do her girl boss tactics to try to reason with him, but there's no reasoning with it because he's like clearly mentally unwell. There were so many times in this movie where I could feel my heart racing, and I think both the actors for the girl boss CEO, Emma Stone, and the guy that was playing the loser incel, I think his name is Jesse Plemons, did such a great job in their roles. The main guy also has a younger brother who's autistic, and I believe the actor is also autistic himself, and he did a really good job. I think that was like his first role ever, and the movie was just fun in a stressful way. And I like the developments of the incel character too. It definitely added that other layer of class and how a lot of times people who are disenfranchised or in poverty or, you know, have very unstable lives, it's almost easier for them to believe in conspiracy theories because like you need to have something to cling on to. I think I could have had a better ending, but I still really enjoyed the movie experience. Another movie I saw a night or two before it came out was Roofman, and that was when Channing Tatum and Kirsten Dunst showed up to the screening in person. I was like, okay, Channing, you kind of attractive. Every time I saw a picture of him afterward, I was like, damn, he doesn't really photograph well. But for some reason, watching him in motion that night and seeing him in person, I was like really into him physically. But the movie itself was okay. It's basically about a guy who is on the run after he escapes from prison, and he hides in a Toys R Us store for a very long extended amount of time. And this is based on a true story. And I think the movie is only interesting because the absurd things actually happened in real life. But in terms of like an actual movie, like the narrative itself, I don't think it was compelling enough for me. And then there were two other movies that have come out that I thought were ass. One of them was Nirvana, the band, the show, the movie. I wish I hadn't even shown up to that early screening. The movie is set up like a mockumentary and it stars these comedians and it's very low budget, and I did not laugh a single time watching it. And then the worst early screening that I saw that I can share publicly is The Housemaid, starring Sydney Sweeney. And I knew the movie would be bad coming in, but even with those lowered expectations, it was still just so much worse than what you could expect. The story felt so much like a Colleen Hoover book without actually being written by Colleen Hoover. The pacing was bloated, the dialogue was stilted, the story was melodramatic in a bad way, the sex was unnecessary, the women in the story are very male-centered. There is this forced feminism that the movie tries to do, but it just feels so ham-fisted and inauthentic. Besides that, I had watched 5 other early screenings for movies that have not been released yet. Most of them I felt meh about, but then there was one that actually kind of moved me. This movie doesn't even have a title for it yet. I really liked this movie because I thought the acting from the main actress was fantastic. The movie was essentially about how even if no one cares about the silly thing that you're doing, what matters is that you care. And I really liked seeing that journey with that character. That's all I can say without, revealing too much. But I can now reveal some of the movies that I had watched in previous years that I wasn't able to share, but they are out now, so now I can share. I had watched 2 A24 movies that came out, Death of a Unicorn and Opus. They were both flops to me, but the first ever early screening that I saw was the one that I cried like 7 different times Johansson. And I mentioned this in one of my previous yearly wrap-up videos, saying that I was surprised that I cried from it because the director is kind of like problematic in like a racist way. And people were like, can you share what the movie is now? And I was like, no, it's not out yet. It is finally out. This movie was Eleanor the Great, directed by Scarlett Johansson. This was her directorial debut. I've joked about her on my channel before with how she, plays Asian characters. But then she ended up gagging me with this movie. So now I'm like, okay, Scarlett, maybe you can be a little bit racist after all, just as a treat. The thing is, the directing and cinematography in this movie weren't really spectacular to me. Like, they didn't stand out. What had made me cry so hard was because of the acting and the writing. Whoever you are that wrote the script, you really ate down. Or was I just really high and emotional? Who knows? Because apparently, according to reviews I looked up, people were not that into the movie. It's essentially about an old lady. After losing her best friend, she moves to New York and her daughter signs her up to attend a support group meeting, but she accidentally walks into the wrong support group. She ends up sharing a story about surviving the Holocaust, even though she wasn't actually there. The truth is, her friend was the one who had experienced the Holocaust and had told the main character a bunch of stories about what she had seen and experienced. And so the movie is about her getting deeper and deeper into this lie because everyone is so touched by her storytelling to the point where the journalism student that is sitting in and hearing the story, she's moved by it because she recently lost her mom. And so she wants to write an article about the main character's fake story. And then the professor is moved by this article and he wants her to come in to talk to the class. And then it just spirals bigger and bigger from there. Honestly, I do kind of like it when movies stress me out in that way, where like I just know a car wreck is gonna happen and I just want to see how it goes. But I think like I ended up crying a lot because the movie was essentially about grief. But now you know what the movie was, and now you know that Scarlett Johansson did indeed make me cry. And so that brings me to the last installment of this video, which is my crying wrapped. So as I mentioned, I had recorded every single time that I cried in the past year, and I decided to put together all of my stats and put it in this presentation, so I will share it to you here. So this year I cried 88 times. That's actually one less time than the number of books that I read. Here is my monthly tier distribution. As you can see, April turned out to be a pretty good month for me. I only cried 2 times, and when I looked at why I had cried twice in April, one of them was crying from laughter, and then the other was actually tearing up from the ending of Sinners. So, it wasn't even like for sad reasons. If we want to talk about sad though, that is the month of June. I cried a total of 16 times. Here are a couple of selfies from that month. 8 of them I had been very upset due to various personal shit happening. 6 of those times though, I was in my feels, basically when I'm feeling like sentimental or wishy-washy or nostalgic or some kind of way. So for example, I was talking about my foster dogs to a friend and I had teared up because I really cared about my foster dogs. They came from such sad backgrounds and they're so sweet and they're so adorable, and I have a big soft spot with dogs. And then the 2 other times I cried was from watching something that was K-pop Demon Hunters and a TikTok video. Speaking of which, here were the movies that I cried the most to least, and I have put this in order of intensity. So number 1 is Flow, because when you have a movie that shows animals being in distress or in danger, I will feel emotional about it. Number 2 was Good Fortune, which I elaborated on earlier. Number 3 was K-pop Demon Hunters. I cried over Jinyu. I cried over Rumi asking her aunt, why don't you love me? And her aunt says, I do love you. And Rumi says, all of me. And I was like, damn. She said acting for real. And then the third time I cried was basically the ending song. Number 4 was Zootopia 2. Nick gives a speech declaring his love for Judy. And I was like, oh my God, I was moved by it. And then as for the other movies, it wasn't as intense as the top 4. So that was Mary and the Witch's Flower, specifically a scene revealing something about animals. The other movies that I teared up in was Wicked 2, My Only Girl, The Long Walk, and my rewatch of Me Before You. Even though I knew how the movie would go, I still teared up anyway. It's a very problematic movie. And a movie is problematic when it actually validates your suicidal ideation. And then the other two movies, I would say like a single tear maybe would be Sinners towards the end, which moves me, and then Materialist when Chris Evans gives a certain speech to Dakota Johnson. And I feel bad that Sinners is so low on the list because it is a good movie. I think I spent more time being amazed by the movie like cinematically than I was like tearing up. But I did tear up with, you know, a specific scene towards the end. Here is some miscellaneous media that I cry to, not necessarily movies, but maybe like certain TV shows. There is a furry anime that came out in 2025. I didn't even cry because I was sad. I cried because something happened in the show that left me gagged. And I can't even tell you what it was because I was high when I watched it, but I do enjoy the show and I do think the dog is hot. I also watched a short film called Kit Bull, and it's about stray animals, so you know, how am I not gonna fucking cry when I watch that? I also watched this anime called Witch Watch, and there was a scene where the main character remembered when she fell for the main guy for the first time, and that was when he had comforted her when they were children, and he told her, I'm strong, you know, like basically implying like she can depend on him instead of being alone. And that moved me, so you know, a bitch teared up. And then there were some TikToks that I cried over. If you are a TikTok user, you might know the story of Tiki the foster dog. We don't actually know his background story, but just seeing that his skin had to be shaved around his eyes made me know that Tiki has been through some shit. And then I also cried over watching a couple of TikToks of a man who had passed away from cancer. I went down a rabbit hole of just like watching their videos, and apparently before he passed away from cancer, his wife just had their baby a few months ago. I also rated my tears from like 1 to 5. So 5 is like a full-on mental breakdown and 1 is like 1 tear slip down. Based on those ratings, I have an average crying intensity of 2.63. So there were 12 times where I was just crying intensely, like mental breakdown wise. But then there were 28 times where it was just a single tear. And that's actually the biggest part of the pie chart here. My most common crying emotion was in my feels at 29.9%. There were 26 times that I had shed tears due to being in my feels. And again, that basically means I was feeling sentimental or sappy or corny. Like for example, the first time that I cried in 2025 was on January 1st, on New Year, because I was high and I was telling my friends that, I don't even know how we got to this topic, but I was telling my friends that I don't think I will ever love myself, like truly. And then my friend was talking about that metaphor in Fruits Basket where everyone's like a rice ball. You see how special everyone is because you see the little fruit or whatever the thing is on the back of the rice ball, but you yourself don't see it. And because I was in my feels, I was like, oh my God, that's so true. And then I was shedding tears from that. The second most common thing is from just watching something. There were 23 times where I cried over that. And then there have been 17 times where I cried from being upset. And then the other few times, just like single digits, were from grief, sympathy, stress, sadness, laughter. This year, I also cried 9 times over my book, which is kind of surprising because when I was writing it, I never cried. But I don't know, I guess like this whole process of like publishing it and it becoming real, we're getting to that point, you know? So there were various reasons that were related to my book. Perhaps the corniest one is I have shed tears over my dreams coming true and just feeling gratitude for that. I think a funny reason is one time I got high and I was reading my latest draft, and I think because I was like inebriated, it made me forget that I wrote specific lines. And I'll share it because you don't understand the context right now, but the line was, it should have been you who died. And I totally forgot I wrote that line and I was gagged. It brought tears upon my eyes because I was like, damn, what a cruel line to say to this character. I also got in my feels after getting in the zone from revising chapter 21. So whatever happened in chapter 21, I guess I was still feeling the sentimentalities. I also teared up from writing my acknowledgements, specifically when I wrote about Victoria. And it was just like one line, but I guess I just really felt it. And then here were some other reasons why I cried. I have talked about this more on one occasion, but I do feel like I will never love myself. Again, that's just how it be, you know? I have cried cried from stress because early on in the year, like literally after I came back home from a funeral, I got laid off. And it was really stressful because I had hundreds of dollars saved up in my health debit account, and I had called both the company to confirm like the deadline for when I would need to move funds, and the answer that they gave me was not true, and I lost those hundreds of dollars. And it was like several weeks of going back and forth with my job's very incompetent HR to try to get back my own money. They were so incompetent that they didn't know how to get it back. So it was just like so much back and forth. HR even tried to ghost me until I said that I will literally show up to the office or contact other coworkers, and it was just a whole ordeal. So I was very frustrated and stressed from that. I've also been upset when my loved ones have messed up doing something that I have asked them to do, because I just have like this issue with believing that I can't depend on anyone. And so someone messes up or isn't able to do like the one thing that I ask, and it just makes me feel sad. I've also cried from like this random man writing an essay length comment about me being a horrible person. And obviously this random guy doesn't know me and I don't know him, and like maybe to him I represent something that he just strongly dislikes and therefore projects that onto me. But regardless of those reasons, it does make me sad when people feel such like strong vitriol against me. It's just not fun when, you know, you're dealing with your own shit. But obviously if someone is writing an essay about a random internet person that they don't actually know, they probably are dealing with some shit too in their personal lives, because no one who is actually happy or content with themselves would do something like that. I've cried from my girlfriend saying that she's happy that I'm alive, because again, your girl going through it, and sometimes when you can't give love to yourself, you gotta get love from other people. And then other times I cry have just been like financial triggers, work stress, and general depression. I also looked at different places I cried, and there have been at least 9 places that have experienced me crying. I have shed tears overseas before, in the United Kingdom, in Italy, in the subway car in New York, which I think is pretty much like a classic when you're a New Yorker. I've cried at a funeral I helped out with this year, and I guess related places that were near the funeral because I was helping out with all of that. I cried in movie theaters because I do get emotional when I watch movies. I cried in the office bathroom, Airbnbs, friends' homes, and my home. And then to conclude this presentation, here are some more crying selfies. The one on the very right is when Victoria and I watched Flow. The bottom left selfie was tears of gratitude. Bottom middle, and then like the third column on the right, I think I was like going through it. That was definitely like upset crying. And then guess what? When I put together this presentation, I cried thinking about Tiki again. I went through the slides with Victoria and I was talking about Tiki. Then I started tearing up again because that dog has been through shit, okay? And then we both also cried when I was going through my crying selfies, and she specifically cried from laughter at the top left selfie because I told her the context of it, which was me reading that essay length comment from that random man that was saying I was a horrible person, and she was crying from laughter because she said that I looked like a baby from there. So basically, when you are mean to me, this is who you're being mean to, okay? My puffy looking face with my oversized bonnet. Anyway, so that concludes my crying wrapped. I hope that this was entertaining. I will continue to track the books I read, the movies I watch, and the tears that I shed this year. You know, surprisingly, as of posting this video, I only teared up once, and it was just like a single tear. That was just me being sad that it's another new year and I have to be forced to continue living, and I really don't want to do this shit. But I guess if you've made it this far, we are all stuck here together. I will see you throughout 2026 for more videos, more movie reactions. I might react to people we meet on vacation. I will continue posting videos of books I read, and I will share more publishing process videos too. And I will see you next time. Bye.
At some point